الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing our discussion on the events that transpired after Musa alayhi salam descended from Mount Sinai. As you recall, my dear brothers and sisters, Musa alayhi salam, along with 70 of the most prominent members of Bani Israel, they had accompanied Musa alayhi salam on his ascent to Mount Sinai, where he received revelation. Initially, that meeting was supposed to take only 30 days. The Quran mentions that it was extended to 40 nights as a trial for Bani Israel. Musa alayhi salam is informed that his community has been tested during his absence. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to Musa before he even gets to the bottom of the mountain that إِنَّا فَتَنَّا قَوْمَكَ مِنْ بَعْدِكَ وَأَضَلَّهُمُ السَّامِرِ, that we have tried your community after you left them, and al-Samiri has misguided them. Now we mentioned that when Musa alayhi salam, when he arrives at base camp, he sees that the overwhelming majority of Bani Israel are now worshiping a golden calf. We're talking about 688,000 of them, according to some narrations, were following or were misguided by Samiri. About 12,000 of them were loyal and obedient to Harun. Now, as we mentioned last night, when Musa alayhi salam returns, the first individual that he questions and interrogates regarding the matter is Harun, because ultimately Harun alayhi salam was appointed by Musa as his representative, his Khalifa during his absence. وقال موسى لهارون اخلفني في قومي وأصلح ولا تتبع سبيل المفسدين. Now we mentioned that the interrogation of Harun is not an interrogation that is based on Musa's actual suspicion. Musa questions Harun not because he believes that Harun might be behind this mutiny that has been created, but rather Musa alayhi salam wants to set an important standard in terms of justice and accountability. And that is that no one is above the law of God. No one is above the law. There is no nepotism with regards to these matters. Musa is not going to just side with his brother because of this blood relationship. You are the leader, and therefore the buck stops with you. With leadership, with authority comes accountability. And Musa alayhi salam also wants to exonerate his brother. He doesn't want there to be even a shadow of doubt regarding the innocence of Harun. Why? Because as we mentioned last night, according to the biblical narrative, according to the Old Testament, according to the book of Exodus, it was Harun who fashioned the golden calf. So to refute that egregious accusation, the Quran focuses so much on the innocence of Harun. Harun, after Musa alayhi salam asks him, what prevented you? What prevented you, O Harun, from stopping them, from interfering? What prevented you from doing something, from taking an active role in opposing al-Samiri and those who were devoted to the worship of the golden calf? We mentioned that last night, that Harun gave 3 reasons. The first is he tells Musa that the community was on the verge of killing me. It's not just a matter of, this is our opinion and, let's agree to disagree. No. They were so adamant about polytheism and idol worship that they were willing to shed the blood of Harun. And Harun alayhi salam, he has a responsibility to keep himself alive. Because if he is killed, then there is no guide among the Israelites. Number 2, Harun tells Musa that خَشِيتُ أَن تَقُولَ فَرَّقْتَ بَيْنَ بَنِي Israel, that I was afraid that you would say that I caused disunity among your people. Because if I oppose Samiri, this is going to turn into an armed conflict. And it's 12,000 against 688,000 potentially. And this will cause bloodshed and division. And once the community is split, it's almost impossible to bring it back. I wanted to preserve the unity because I knew that you will come back shortly and you will be able to deal with this fitna in a non-violent way. And then number 3, Harun alayhi salam, he says that I also wanted to observe this chain of command, this hierarchy. For me to, bear arms and fight and engage in a civil war, this is not a decision that I felt that I could make unilaterally. At the end of the day, you are the highest prophet of the time, and I am subservient to you. I am subordinate to you. So Musa alayhi salam, he listens to these excuses that are given to him by Harun, and he accepts them as legitimate excuses. And he makes a dua. Oh Allah, forgive me and forgive my brother and admit us into your mercy. Surely you are the most merciful of the merciful. Now, the second individual who gets interrogated by Musa alayhi salam is al-Samiri. So we mentioned the Quran tells us that Musa, upon returning, he interrogates and he speaks to 3 groups, 3 parties. The first is Harun, the second is Musa, the second is Samiri, and the third is the wider community, the Israelites. So now we finished with Harun. Harun's innocence has been proven. Now we come to al-Samiri. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Musa that Samiri is the one who caused them all to deviate. وَأَضَلَّهُمْ السَّامِرِ. Now, Musa alayhi salam here, he knows through revelation that Samiri is guilty. But notice, he does not act. And in fact, he was informed before he even arrived. So this knowledge was a sort of knowledge of the unseen, because he had yet to arrive at base camp. But notice that prophets do not always act on their knowledge of the unseen. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects them to act in accordance with the natural course of how things unfold. So Musa doesn't come down and say, Allah revealed to me that you're guilty, punishment. No, Musa alayhi salam, he affords him the opportunity to explain himself. He doesn't exact punishment against Samiri without first allowing him to go through that due process, as we call it. And the same thing applies to the Ahlul Bayt. You may say that if Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam knew that Ibn Muljim was going to strike him, why didn't he throw him in jail? Because that's not justice to punish before the performance of a crime. The crime hasn't been committed yet. So Ali cannot act on that knowledge of the unseen that he might have regarding issues. So this is a Quranic precedent for this idea that just because a prophet knows something, it doesn't mean that they are authorized to act on that knowledge of the unseen. Now, Musa alayhi salam, now before we get into the conversation, we have to spend a few moments reflecting on this name, Al-Samiri. Who is Al-Samiri? Who is this individual that rose among the Israelites and was able to misguide the majority of them? Now, when you look at this name, there's a discussion among the scholars regarding the meaning of this name, Al-Samiri. Some have said Samiri is a laqab, meaning it's a title. It's a title. It's not his actual name. And it's an Arabic word. It's an Arabic word that comes from the root word Samara, which means night, which means darkness. And the idea here is, in many languages, light and darkness are metaphors for guidance and misguidance. And therefore, some have said that Samiri is a laqab, which comes from Samara, which means dark, right? Just like when someone has dark skin, we say he's asmar, right? So Samiri means the dark one, i.e. the misguider, As-Samiri. This is one opinion. That Samiri is a description of his character. He's a dark person, he's a dark soul. And he is the one who caused other people to go into darkness. That's one view. The second view, and I don't believe that the first view is a very strong opinion. We'll get to the second view. The second view is that Samiri refers to someone from the city of Samira. In the same way you have someone who's Pakistani, Iraqi, Lubnani, that E means that they're a resident of that place. They're attributed to that city. So in the same way, someone from Iraq is called Iraqi. Samiri is from one of the cities nearby, and he is known as Samiri. And therefore, he was not a Jew, he was a Gentile. He comes from one of the neighboring areas, and he joined Musa alayhi salam as he was leaving Egypt. This is one opinion, another opinion that's put forward. But the problem is these first two opinions, they don't have any solid evidence. They're just conjecture. And in fact, some Orientalist scholars have used the story of Samiri to try to discredit the Quran. They say that if you go to the Bible mentions a town called Samaria. And they say that this city was established 700 years after Moses. So this is an error, a mistake made in the Quran, because the Quran is attributing, is naming a person who comes from a city that was founded and established 700 years after Musa alayhi salam. And therefore the Quran is the word of Muhammad, and this book is not divine. Again, who says that? Muslim scholars have claimed that Samiri means someone from the city of Samara. That's unfounded. There's a third opinion, which I believe is much more plausible. And that is that no, Samiri was a Jew. He was a member of Bani Israel. And in fact, he is from among the descendants of Yaqub. We know that Yaqub alayhi salam, and Yaqub, as we know, he's the father of Yusuf, right? He's the son of Ishaq, the grandson of Ibrahim. Yaqub, he had 12 sons. He had 12 sons. Yusuf, Binyamin, and the other 10. Yaqub had 10 sons, and all of them are mentioned in the Old Testament. Now, one of the 12 sons of Yaqub is a man by the name, in Arabic we say his name is Yasakir. In English, in the Old Testament, he's mentioned as Issachar. He's one of the sons of Yaqub. This man, if you look at his lineage, he has children, they're named in the Old Testament, and he has a grandson named Shimron. The Arabicized version of that is Samiri. So here, some scholars have said that most likely Samiri he's one of the grandsons, he's a grandson, he's the great-grandson of Yaqub. He's an Israelite, which would explain why he would have so much influence. It's very unlikely that you have a Gentile joining Bani Israel and they have so much influence and they're able to misguide the majority. This must have been someone who has a prominent status among the Israelites. Someone who must have been well respected. And this is the opinion of one of our great scholars who has a great deal of expertise in Hebrew literature. And he is actually one of the teachers of Sayyid al-Khou'i. Sayyid al-Khou'i had a teacher by the name of Al-Allama Muhammad Jawad al-Balaghi. Al-Allama al-Balaghi. He was a teacher of Sayyid al-Khou'i. And this scholar, he was a mujtahid of his time. He's one of the few Shi'i scholars who he actually mastered Hebrew. He studied Hebrew. You know, it's one thing to rely on translations. He studied ancient Hebrew, he mastered it, and he spent many years studying the Torah and studying Hebrew literature. So much so that he ends up writing a book called Al-Huda ila Din al-Mustafa, which literally means the guide to the religion of al-Mustafa. Now, what is this book about? A good portion of this book is dedicated to analyzing passages of the Torah that prove the prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now you can imagine how much time and how much effort this took. So he writes this book, and look at, just as a side note, look at the humility of these great scholars of Islam. If you write a book like that, imagine a book like this was written by an academic. There would be book signings, and this person would, they put their name on the cover with all of their titles, and they would be doing book tours. Al-Allam al-Balaghi, when he wrote this book, he didn't even put his name on the book. These are people, they don't care about popularity. They don't care about who gets credit for it. He didn't even put his name on the book. The only thing that he wrote on the book is that if you would like to contact the author, send a letter to this address. He didn't even put his name on the book. And this shows us, brothers and sisters, and this is important, especially in a day and age where, people like to promote themselves, and this is the time where it's all about self-promotion. We have to remember the importance of doing things purely fi sabilillah, right? Now, I'm not saying that everything that you do needs to be done in secret, but at least there should be some good things that you do in your life that no one knows about it except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because these deeds that you do in secret, where it's only between you and Allah, this is when you know that it has not been polluted by riyah. There's no showing off. So, Al-Samiri is most likely one of the descendants of Yaqub alayhi salam. Now, how was he able to misguide the overwhelming majority of Bani Israel? How is it possible? You have two prophets. So this is not a community that lacked leadership. You have Musa and you have Harun, who have spent years educating these people. And these are people, not only have they been given knowledge, they've been given mu'jizat, miracles. How is it? Sometimes I wonder how, I have trouble fathoming, how is it possible that Allah sent you two prophets, and among them, you also have Yusha ibn Nun among you, who's the successor of Musa, because Harun dies before Musa, as we will discuss. You have all of these prominent figures, you have miracles, you have revelation, and in 10 days, Samiri misguides all of them. How did this happen? There are a number of factors that contributed to this. Sometimes we have to look at the root causes of things. How did this happen? This didn't just happen randomly. There's a reason behind it. Number one, the first factor that contributed to the misguidance of the majority of these people is that, number one, the absence of Musa was a contributing factor. There's no doubt about that. The absence of Musa contributed to this. Why? Because Musa was the only one whose authority was undisputed. The absence of an undisputed authority created a vacuum. Now, yes, Harun was appointed, and Harun is a prophet of God, and Harun is infallible. But from the perspective, now in the eyes of God, they're both authorities. But from the perspective of the people, who has greater importance? Musa. Musa, even though Harun was appointed by Musa, even though Harun was chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people do not look at Harun as the way they look at Musa. They give more authority to Musa, even though Musa said that you have to obey Harun. And subhanAllah, this is the same story in Islam. Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says something. It is not given as much weight as the word of the Prophet. Even though the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa said, Man kuntu mawla fahadha Aliyun mawla. Sometimes you bring an narration from Ali ibn Abi Talib. No, this is not enough. We want a hadith from the Prophet. The Prophet said that whoever I was his master, Ali is his master. Same problem with Bani Israel. Musa has authority. Harun's word doesn't carry as much weight, even though Musa said, "Ukhlifni fi qawmi wa aslih." So the absence of Musa contributed to this. Number two, the ignorance of Bani Israel. The ignorance and the naivety of Bani Israel contributed to this problem. When you have a community of ignorant people, and it doesn't matter how many lectures you listen to, maybe you've been listening to lectures for 30 years, but you're so jahil because you don't understand. You're just a passive listener. These people, they've heard many sermons from Musa and Harun, but going to a majlis, listening to a lecture, going to tens of Jum'ah prayers does not automatically make you a learned person. Sometimes it's in one ear, out the other. There's no reflection. Sometimes we attend programs just to register our attendance. I was there, check. But there's no presence of heart. There's no attentiveness. So these people, they were ignorant. And another thing is that when you are ignorant, you are not able to distinguish a speaker from a scholar. Samiri must have been a very charismatic speaker. He must have had leadership skills. He must have been very sociable, very charismatic, very eloquent, very articulate. And because he was charismatic and articulate, he captured and captivated the people. And this is a problem that we have today in our communities. One of the biggest problems in our communities is ignorance. People are not able to distinguish who is an alim and who is just a speaker. And we will spend more time listening to a speaker than a scholar because we want to be entertained. It's boring. Right? Even though a scholar might be giving you knowledge that's very important, but we cannot tolerate even 40 minutes of boredom. No, I have to be entertained, even in a majlis. I have to be entertained. So that's why this is a pitfall that Bani Israel fell into. They were captivated by Samiri. They were captivated by him. And when you are ignorant, you don't know who to take knowledge from. You take knowledge from whoever's charismatic, whoever's a powerful orator, whoever can crack a few jokes here and there. There's an interesting hadith from Imam al-Kadhim salawatullahi alayhi. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he reports, and this is mentioned by Sheikh al-Sadiq in his Amali. He says, دخل رسول الله المسجد فإذا جماعة قد أطافوا برجل. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he enters the masjid and he sees that there's a huge crowd surrounding this one man. There's a huge crowd. It's as if he's some type of celebrity. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he asks the people, Ma hadha, what's going on? They say to the Prophet, فَقِيلَ عَلَّامَ. They said to the Prophet that this person is such a knowledgeable person. So the Prophet asked them, he says, وَمَا الْعَلَّامَ? What is your definition of someone who is extremely knowledgeable? So they say to the Prophet, this person, everyone is fighting to listen to him and to get close to him. Who is this person? They say, Ya Rasulullah, this man is أعلم الناس بأنساب العرب. This man is an expert on the genealogy of the Arabs. ووقائعها, and he knows a lot about the history of Jahiliyyah. And he knows a lot about pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. وبالأشعار العربية. This is what they consider to be someone who is so knowledgeable. The Prophet, do you know what he says? فَقَالَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. He says, ذَاكَ عِلْمٌ لَا يَضُرُّ مَنْ جَهِلَ وَلَا يَنْفَعُ مَنْ عَلِمَ. The Prophet says, this type of knowledge, it doesn't harm the one who is ignorant of it, and it doesn't benefit the one who knows it. Useless information, useless knowledge. But people, they find it interesting. They find it fascinating. And we have the same problem today. We will flock to people who have useless knowledge. Not only useless, it's baseless. I guarantee you today, if I gave a lecture series on the interpretation of dreams, there will be people filling the center. Lining up, Sheikh, I want you to interpret my dream. As if this is some type of ilm that we should seek. This is what the people want. They're looking for these mysterious branches of knowledge that don't have any benefit. People are not able to distinguish. When people are ignorant, people like Samiri rise. When people are ignorant, you don't have scholars on the minbar anymore. You have storytellers. You have people who share this dream and that dream. And this is why it's important to reflect upon the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi. There's a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib where he says, Allah, and it's from the 6th Imam, and this is mentioned in Al-Kafi, a very important source in our hadith tradition. Imam al-Sadiq reports from Amir al-Mu'mineen, قال أمير المؤمنين ألا أخبركم بالفقيه حق الفقيه. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, do you want me to tell you who is a true scholar? Imagine Amir al-Mu'mineen sitting with us and he's telling us, do you want me to tell you who you should take your knowledge from? Who is a true alim? Who has a deep understanding of Islam? Who? مَنْ لَمْ يُقَنِّطِ النَّاسِ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. The Imam then gives some qualities of a true scholar. He says a true scholar is the one who does not make people despair of the mercy of Allah. That's number one. So if you're sitting and listening to someone and it's all doom and gloom, and they make you feel like you're never going to make it to Jannah and it's all misery, this is not a true scholar. Whoever makes people lose hope in the mercy of Allah, this is not a true scholar. And then the Imam says, but on the other hand, وَلَمْ يُؤْمِنْهُمْ مِنْ عَذَابِ اللَّهِ. And a true scholar is not someone who makes people feel immune from Allah's punishment. There's balance. They're not always talking about love and mercy. No. The Imam says, he doesn't make them lose hope in Allah's mercy, but he doesn't embolden them to sin. He makes them realize that, yes, Allah is merciful, but Allah will hold you accountable. It's a sin to think that Allah will never punish me. No, Allah will hold you accountable if you don't repent, if you're arrogant, if you transgress. And then he says, وَلَمْ يُرَخِّصْ لَهُمْ فِي مَعَاصِ اللَّهِ. And he doesn't give them, a green light to commit sins. He doesn't help them find justifications and illegitimate loopholes. When it comes to haram, he's firm. He doesn't try to sugarcoat things. And then he says, وَلَمْ يَتْرُكِ الْقُرْآنَ رَغْبَةً عَنْهُ إِلَىٰ غَيْرِ. And a true scholar does not leave the Quran in search of other things that will give him guidance. Sometimes you'll sit and you listen to a speaker, lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, 4, 5, 6 lectures, not a single Quranic verse mentioned. Mentioning Rumi said this and Fulan said that and this and that and this is a dream that I saw, and none of it is verifiable. None of it is verifiable. All dreams and unfounded stories that have no sources, no mention of Quran, no mention of ahadith. And you'll have people flock to this person. This is a scholar. If you're listening to a scholar who is devoid of any Quranic references, that's a red flag. I'm not saying that you should accuse them, but there should be a red flag. If there's no reference to Quran, there's a problem. The Quran is the foundation. So the first problem with Bani Israel is that they were probably captivated by someone who is charming, charismatic, and eloquent. The biggest mistake that you can make is to equate charisma with knowledge, charisma with qualification. There might be someone who has a very beautiful voice, they can recite masa'ib and na'i, and they can make you cry. But that doesn't mean that they're people of knowledge. Doesn't mean that they're qualified. It's astonishing to me that if we want someone to teach our kids preschool, we want to make sure that it's a licensed teacher. But to come sit on the minbar of Imam al-Hussein, I don't want to say Tom, Dick, and Harry, any Abdullah, Jasim, and Mahmoud can come and sit here. This is a responsibility, brothers and sisters. It's a responsibility upon the speaker that this is not your pulpit. This is the minbar of Imam al-Hussein. You share their knowledge. This is not a seat to give your opinions. And this is a responsibility for the speaker, for the community who comes and sits here. Because if you bring someone and you give them a platform and they're not qualified and you did not do your due diligence, Allah will hold you responsible for all of the confusion and the doubt and the misguidance that will ensue. Allah will say, you invited this person. Why did you invite this person? Why did you take the fiqh of Ja'far al-Sadiq so lightly? You have to be very careful. So number one, the absence of that undisputed authority contributed to the deviation of Bani Israel, even though he had appointed Harun. The ignorance of the people, their inability to distinguish who is a true scholar and who is an imposter. And then we find, number three is that Samiri also recognizes that these are people who are greedy. They're materialistic. They have an insecurity complex. He knows that these are people that seeing is believing. He understood the psychology of his people. He knew that they will never be satisfied with a God that they cannot see. So he exploited this materialistic tendency within them, that they gravitate towards things that they can touch, and therefore he constructed an idol for them. Now, Musa alayhi salam, what does he do? He says, فَمَا خَطْبُكَ يَا سَامِرِ. What is your case? Musa doesn't accuse him. He says, what's going on? What is your case here? What's the matter? What has happened? Musa gives him the opportunity to defend himself. Ayah number 96 of Surah Taha. قال بصرت بما لم يبصروا به. Samiri, he says, and I'll read the translation based on how it's commonly translated, and then we'll get into some of the details. Samiri says to Musa that I saw something that the others did not see. بصرت بما لم يبصروا فقبضت قبضة من أثر الرسول. So I took from the remnants, from the footsteps of the messenger, فنبذتها, and I threw it. وكذلك سولت لي نفسي, and this is what my soul enticed me to do. Now, the well-known story that I'm sure many of you have heard from the minbar, maybe you've read, is that what happened? When Musa took Bani Israel across the Red Sea, of course, Musa is in the front, Bani Israel, they're crossing, and who's behind Musa? Fir'aun and his forces. The well-known story is what? That Jibreel came down in human form, riding on a horse. Why? Because Jibreel wanted the horse of Fir'aun to follow the horse in front of him, because the horse of Fir'aun is going to stop unless there is another horse nearby in front of it to gallop, so that the horse of Pharaoh also gallops into the sea. The well-known story says what? That Samiri recognized that this was Jibreel riding on a horse. And he saw something that others didn't see. What did he see? He saw that life would emerge from beneath the hoof of the horse that Jibreel was riding on. So it would gallop and there was life behind. So he knew that there was barakah. There must be barakah, blessings that come from the soil that is touched by the hoof of the horse that Jibreel is riding upon. So I took this sand and I fashioned the golden calf, and I sprinkled this sand on the golden calf, and it brought it to life. It allowed the calf to low. This is the well-known story. The problem is that this is a baseless story. It's baseless for a number of reasons. Number one, there is no hadith in Sunni or Shia references that mentions this hadith. No reliable tradition that mentions it. In fact, we don't even have an unreliable narration that attributes it to an Imam or the Ahlul Bayt. It's attributed to some of the Tabi'een, and even then the chain of transmission is questionable. So this story has no basis in our hadith literature. You will not find this narration attributed to the Prophet or any of the Ahlul Bayt. This is number one. It's attributed to the Tabi'een, again with weak chains of transmission. Secondly, if you go to the ayah, and this is where it requires a little bit of knowledge of the Arabic language. Samiri says what? He says, بَصُرْتُ بِمَا لَمْ يَبْصُرُوا بِهِ. بَصُرْتُ. Basurtu in the Arabic language is different from absartu. You have absartu, which means I saw with my eyes. But Samiri doesn't say absartu. He says basurtu, which comes from basira. So here, just from the Arabic, we know that this is not something that Samiri saw physically with his eyes. So it's not that he saw Jibreel riding on, it has nothing to do with the sight of the eye. بَصُرْتُ بِمَا لَمْ يَبْصُرُوا بِهِ. Number 3. The narrations say that the well-known story says that this dust had some special power to generate a sound from the golden calf, to generate life. It gave life to that calf, the golden calf. If you go to the Quran, there is a hint in the Quran that this is not true. In ayah number 88 of Surah Taha, فَأَخْرَجَ لَهُمْ عِجْلًا جَسَدًا لَهُ خُوَارٌ. The Quran refers to the golden calf that was constructed as jasad. In the Arabic language, jasad is something that is lifeless. Jism is something that has life in it. Jasad is devoid of life. So here the Quran negates any idea that this dust revived or gave life to this golden calf. And also, there is no evidence that Samiri is someone who had spiritual insight, who could see Jibreel, or who was able to, notice things that were supernatural. There's no evidence for us to assert that Samiri had some type of superpower. We have scholars like Sheikh Muhammad Jawad al-Mughniya in his tafsir. He says that there was no actual superpower, supernatural power in the hoof of in that soil. He's like, Samiri, imagine this. It's very possible that he made up this story. He concocted this story, or he took from that. He thought that it was Jibreel. He took from the soil. This was a superpower, a supernatural power that he imagined, but it had no reality. And the sound effect that came out from the golden calf could easily be explained. Perhaps there was some type of hollow mechanism that Samiri created, and when you blow into it, it makes a lowing sound. We don't need to say that this was something that was miraculous. And I'll end here, brothers and sisters, by mentioning that some scholars, when they go back to this verse, they say that when Samiri says basurtu bima lam yabsuru bih, it could mean that Samiri is saying that I had certain insights that other people did not have with respect to your teachings. Meaning, فَقَبَضْتُ قَبْضَةً مِنْ أَثَرِ الرَّسُولِ, that I took some of the athar. The word athar, it can refer to the remnant teachings of a prophet. That's why a synonym for hadith is athar. فَقَبَضْتُ قَبْضَةً مِنْ أَثَرِ الرَّسُولِ, meaning that I took some of the knowledge from the teachings of Musa. من أثر الرسول, which is Musa. فَنَبَذْتُهَا, but I put it aside. And I decided to turn to idol worship. Now here, this ayah suggests to us that Samiri probably had influence because he had some knowledge of the teachings of Musa. Meaning that from the perspective of Bani Israel, he had knowledge. And one of the most important lessons here is that not everyone who has knowledge is pious. Sometimes people will use religion as a guise to advance their own agendas. So here you have Samiri using religion, using the language of religion to influence and manipulate people. And this is why we have to be very careful with who we take knowledge from. We don't only take knowledge from people who have knowledge. Ahlul Bayt have taught us that take knowledge from people who have knowledge and have taqwa, who are pious. And I'll conclude with this hadith, which is a warning from our 11th Imam, al-Imam al-Askari, salawatullahi alayhi, where he warns us about corrupt scholars. It's possible for someone to have knowledge and be corrupt. They're obsessed with dunya. They're obsessed with fame. They're obsessed with power. We shouldn't be naive and think that anyone who wears a turban is automatically pious. Because if that's what you think, oh, you're in for some interesting stories in your life. It's not the case. That's why one of the conditions for taqleed, if you want to do taqleed of a scholar, is that they have to be mujtahid and they have to be adil. They have to be pious. They have to be righteous. Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, he says, وَهُمْ, and this narration is found in Kitab al-Ihtijaj. The riwayah is mursala. It doesn't have a full chain, but the content is corroborated by other narrations. He says, وَهُمْ, meaning the corrupt scholars. وَهُمْ أَضَرُّ عَلَى ضُعَفَاءِ شِيعَتِنَا مِنْ جَيْشِ يَزِيدَ عَلَى الْحُسَيْنِ بْنِ عَلِي. Imam al-Askari, he says, a corrupt scholar is more dangerous for the Shias than the army of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Why? It's more dangerous than the army of Yazid that fought against Imam al-Hussein and his ashab. Why? فَإِنَّهُمْ يَسْلِبُونَ الْأَرْوَاحَ وَالْأَمْوَالِ. The army of Yazid, the only thing that they could do to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, his companions, is that they took their lives. They took away their physical lives. But a corrupt scholar can snatch your soul. A corrupt scholar can snatch your soul and your money, right? They strip you of your spirituality and your money. وَهَؤُلَاء عُلَمَاءُ السُّوءِ. And the Imam says, these are the evil scholars. And then he says, and how do they operate? What is their style? What do they do, these evil scholars? يُدْخِلُونَ الشَّكَّ وَالشُّبْهَ عَلَى ضُعَفَاءِ شِيعَتِنَا فَيُضِلُّونَهُمْ. Their policy is what? They constantly inject doubt and confusion to the minds of the Shia. They don't take you from doubt to certainty. They take you from certainty to doubt. All they do is they share with you information that creates confusion and doubt. And we have many of them today, my dear brothers and sisters. All they do is they bring forward controversial issues. They share with you issues that require an in-depth discussion, and they'll just make references just to inject doubt. Imam al-Askari says we have to be careful. Attach yourself to the God-fearing scholars, the scholars who are far from dunya, the scholars who are committed to the Quran and the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt. It was this is what caused the deviation of Bani Israel. They were drawn to a charismatic leader, an eloquent person, an articulate person who might have had some knowledge, but that person was devoid of taqwa. They were devoid of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah to guide us and bless us and illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi al-tahirin.